Hello, everyone. Welcome to Attitudinal Healing International's webinar series, Attitudinal Healing Around the World. Today, it's our great pleasure to welcome Don Goewey, an old friend of mine and an old friend of Attitudinal Healing for many, many years. Don is the president and founder of ProAttitude. And before that, for 12 years, he was the executive director of the founding center, the International Attitudinal Healing Center in Sausalito, California. In earlier times, he was also, he managed the Department of Psychiatry at Stanford University. So Don has a wealth of experience that he's bringing to his talk today. Not only professional experience, but Don has also been practicing attitudinal healing in his own life for more than 30 years. So Don, we're excited to hear your talk today, and we're so grateful that you're here with us. Welcome.
Today, I'm going to get off this screen in a minute. We're going to do most of our tracking using these PowerPoint slides because it gives you a audio-visual relationship with all the material. About 15 years ago, neuroscience in particular, but science in general, social sciences, began to catch up with Gary Dompolsky and Diane Cerencioni in terms of the thought system, the healing system that they had been bringing out into the world. Up until that point, it wasn't uncommon to hear medical people, science people say that something like attitudinal healing was airy-fairy. Far from it. It's powerful. It's radical, is what it is. So this program we are about to embark on is going to cover 3 areas. I'm going to drop out of here. The first is some of the research that supports the philosophy and approach and principles of attitudinal healing, particularly the one that asserts health is inner peace and healing is letting go of fear. Nothing could be truer in medical science at this point in time. Second is the discovery of the mirror neuron system that supports the premise in attitudinal healing that all minds are joined. The mirror neuron system literally puts us in each other's brains, in each other's minds. The third is research on creativity and the power of inner peace to generate creative insight in your life. So I won't be giving you specific citations or references to the research that I mentioned, but it's all here in my book. You know, it's impractical to try to delineate all the research that I'm going to cite, and besides that, research citations are very long, but you can find the references in my book, The End of Stress. There's more than 200 in there, and most of them you can find in chapter 1, and you can get it at Amazon. It only costs $9.99, of which I think I make 20 cents. So let's start. Let's start with a brief discussion about this brain of ours, this 8-pounder on top of our head. You know, science often refers to we human beings as the crown of creation. And that's because of our brain. You know, the human brain is arguably nature's single greatest achievement. And Nobel Prize laureate Eric Kindle tells us that we direct this brain of ours with the most complex set of processes. This is a quote from him: the most complex set of processes in the universe, our mind. Well, in the last 15, 20 years, new research in neuroscience has identified the mindset, the mental attitude that enables higher order brain networks to function at full power. And this is what we're going to dig into today. When higher brain networks wire and fire together, they hum away happily at the brain speed of 100 million computer instructions per second. That's fast. When that happens, the odds of you succeeding at life, however you define success at life, improve immensely at every level, from your family life to your career, from your physical and emotional well-being to maximizing the full measure of your talent and skill, growing yourself into the human, closing that gap between how you really are and how you really want to be. It's a brain generating what's called fluid intelligence. Fluid intelligence is that intellectual power that our brain gives us, and connecting it up with creative intelligence to achieve goals, along with emotional and social intelligence that instills joy in your work, brings peace to your life, and instills love in your relationships. And it's all connected and key to uh, your health and your longevity. The unhappy news is that we also have a lower brain, which produces fear, which produces stress and anxiety, which usually bottom out as depression. And the biochemistry of this system debilitates, erodes, even damages these higher brain networks that make us the crown of creation, inhibiting us from succeeding fully at life. So we have two systems, one generating happiness, the other generating unhappiness. So let's briefly review these two systems. There it is up on screen. The first system is what I've been calling the higher brain. Its proper name is the prefrontal cortex, and there it is highlighted in blue. Much of what we define as human intelligence is generated in this part of the brain. The higher brain invented art, music, science, agriculture, engineering, religion, spiritual systems. Um, Without it, we wouldn't have invented, Jerry wouldn't have invented the Center for Attitudinal Healing. Incredibly creative, incredibly powerful. It's where the brain's chief executive has its office, performing all the executive functions, and that's the name neuroscience gives it, the executive functions that produce your plans, your strategies, solves your problems. Um, the prefrontal cortex takes the creative insight that's generated from the right brain and it turns it into intuition, turns that intuition into creativity that creates practical innovations. It's a place in your brain where the better angels of your nature reside, enabling you to sustain a constructive, positive relationship with other people and to think beyond a limited self-interest, an egoistic self-interest, to think for the greater good, for your family, for your community, for your country. Research on meditation and mindfulness, particularly in the last 20 years, points to the power of spiritual practices to change and optimize higher brain function in a way that science didn't believe was possible up until about 20 years ago. It clearly appears now that peace is core to optimal brain function, inner peace. It's core to optimal brain function. So let's test that. Trish is gonna do some writing up here, but first of all, what I want you to do is take out a piece of paper and a pen. Take a moment if you need to gather that. And what I want you to do is to identify your experience when you're functioning at a peak level. When this is you at the top of your game, this is you functioning at your very best. And I want you to list 10 words or short phrases that describe your experience when you're in that flow, when you're in the zone, when you feel like your brain's running on all cylinders and is able to make things happen without the usual stress and strain that unsettle you. This is your best day whenever it arrives. Just 10 one word or very short phrases to capture that in terms of you. And when you have your list together, raise your hand. All you have to do is to go up to the top. You'll see that little icon with the hand raised, and bring it down and click on the raised hand. Again, just 10. If you can't think of 10, then stop at whatever you think of. And again, short, one word, short phrases. Okay. So Trish, would you gather the list and just type it on the screen? Hopefully it'll work. Hopefully the screen will take your typing.
Sure. Do we want to have the people who have their hand raised give us their words?
Yeah.
Okay.
You
So
first. Maybe some of the people didn't have paper and
okay.
pen.
So Diane, would you like to give us your words first?
No, just three. I'm sorry. Just take three
Okay.
from each person.
Diane, what are your first three words? If you can't use your microphone, you can type them in the chat box and I can see them there and read them for you. Okay. I see Diane is typing in the flow. Hopeful. And centered. And how about you, Lisa? What are your three words?
You have to unmute yourself, Lisa.
My three words would be loving, energized, creative ideas flow.
Whoops. I got a typo there. Let me fix that.
I think you're going to have to hit the return for them to
Oh,
show
they're
up
not
on
showing up
screen.
yet? Okay.
There they are.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now, Ingrid, what are your three words?
You can type them into the chat if your mic's not working.
Okay, okay, here we go. Sing, happy, laugh, easily solve problems.
Okay.
Okay, and we have one more, Susan Thiam. What are your words, Susan? Susan's typing. Focused, passionate, enjoy what I'm doing. Okay, Don, that's everyone who had, okay, there's Dawn's. Peaceful. Let me find another spot to write here. Peaceful, calm, creative.
Yeah, and I'd even add optimistic. I feel
Okay.
optimistic. So what you see up there on screen is this is typical of what I see when I go into corporations and work with senior executives. Nobody ever has listed, I have a lot of money. I have all the right people in the right seats. I got, they don't list external things when they talk about themselves at the top of their game. They list things like what you've listed here in the flow: hopeful, centered, another word for peaceful, loving, energized, creative, singing, happy, laughing, easily solve problems, focused, passionate. I enjoy what I'm doing. I'm peaceful. I'm calm. I'm creative. I'm optimistic. These are the qualities of that ignite your higher brain. And you have to admit, I've been doing this for 10 years, and I have a long list of these, and they're all pretty much the same over and over and over again, whether I'm working with construction workers or engineers or therapists or people like you who are involved in the community of attitudinal healing. And if you look at this list, you have to admit there's a kind of mystical quality to this list, a spiritual quality. You could almost say that peak performance seems to be a spiritual experience. And this list of qualities can also be said to represent a mental attitude. And so that that just simple little exercise tests out on the power of a spiritual orientation to put you at your best and to get the best out of your brain. Okay, thank you everybody for sharing that. Well, the second system that we have, that we're going to talk about today, is the lower or the primitive brain, some people call it the limbic system. It's where the stress response system resides. And the lower brain is run by a network called the amygdala. I'm sure most of you have heard it. The red arrow is pointing to that. The amygdala has also been called the brain's fear center. And this system plays a substantial role in negative mental states, such as stress, aggression, anxiety, depression, all the emotions that would logically fall under the heading of fight, flight, or freeze. And this system, it makes us selfish, does not think for the greater good. It's only concerned with meeting its needs and securing its survival. And the amygdala is not a very good team member, partner, very poor leader. This system's not very intelligent, not intelligent in the way I described the higher brain. If it has an intelligence, it's a reactive intelligence. The amygdala is fully developed in a human being by the age of 2, whereas the higher brain takes 18 years to develop in a human being. So what that means is if it's developed in human beings by age 2, it has the intelligence of a 2-year-old. And so, when you see somebody in a full-blown stress reaction, it's not uncommon to hear someone say they behave like a 2-year-old. Well, that's the brain region that was in charge of their behavior at that moment. And when we're stressed, the lower brain takes charge of our mind, and we become the opposite of peace and happiness and enthusiasm and joy and intelligence and logic and higher energy and alertness. So here's what it can turn into on us. Do you all recognize this? How many of us are stressed over machines like computers, that are not, or devices that are not working properly? I was having a little bit of that this morning with this link up. How many of us dealt with stressed people from time to time, like that person yelling on the phone? How many of us have been that person on the phone? How many of us have been stopped by our own pessimism? Pessimism is the amygdala generating the anxiety that says, I can't. And if I can't, I won't survive. When you drill to the bottom of a stress reaction, a fear reaction, simply by asking people as they state their fear, I'm afraid that this issue, this thing that's been put on my to-do list, for example, is going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back. And it moves through, I'm afraid I'm going to fail. And you keep going. Trish and I did a workshop in Hawaii years ago with this lawyer, and he was losing a case, and he was projecting onto the opposing attorney, onto the judge, called them crooks and names like that, and you could tell he was really stressed by it. And he thought he was going to lose the case, lose his job, lose his reputation. All of those things really freak out your fear center, your amygdala. And when I got to the bottom, when he said he would probably lose his job, I said, and if you lose your job, what are you afraid of? And he got this look like a deer in headlights. And I said, what are you feeling? And he said, it's not what I'm feeling, it's what I'm seeing. I just saw myself pushing a shopping cart down Main Street, with all my belongings in it. That's how far it travels. And where the amygdala, at that point, you're getting right into the raw, primitive part of the amygdala, which is afraid of dying, the fear of dying. And the fear of failing leads to the fear of being banished, which to our primitive brain back in the cave days, if you got kicked out of the cave in those days, you died. You needed the tribe to survive. So let's go to the next slide. Oh, yes, traffic. Those of us who live in the Bay Area know how stressful that can be. How many of us are stressed by time pressures? A lot of us. You can't get home. Most people think it's unavoidable. And what the research finds, Carney down at the UCLA does research on families. What he finds is that what happens is that when people are stressed, they take it home, they begin to think something's wrong with the marriage, and that turns into a projection. They think there's something wrong with their spouse, and what they find out is what's really wrong is they're both stressed, they're both fearful, and if they could find the means to let go of that, they begin to understand that it's eminently possible to love each other again. And if they don't find a way to get back to love, to make a return to love, they end up in divorce court. They also found that stressed parents bring the stress home to their kids. And they did a study on 1,000 children, and they found out, they asked these children, what do you want most from your parents? And then they asked the parents to guess what the kids would say. Most of the parents said they want to go to Disneyland, they want a bicycle, they want more quality time with me, that kind of thing. And overwhelmingly, the kids said, I want my parents to stop being so stressed. They really feel it. They feel it when mom comes to pick them up at daycare, and they can see it in their face. They hear it in dad's footsteps coming up the path as he's coming up the driveway coming home, and the way he plunges himself into a chair and groans. And it affects them. It stresses them. One thing about our emotional state is that they're contagious. And the most powerful person in the room is creating the most contagion. And for kids, that's mom and dad. So that's a serious consequence of fear and stress. And of course, stress means that we tend to worry, and worry tends to create a stress reaction. If we wake up worried and ruminating in the middle of the night, we dump a stress hormone into our system called adrenaline, and once that's been dumped in the system, you're not going back to sleep. You're on speed. You're going to be more susceptible to getting sick, and it's also stress and fear are major contributors to substance abuse, another serious set of problems. And this is the way most Americans, and particularly corporate people I work with, take their vacation. They never escape it. Chronic stress is hard to turn off. We check emails on vacation, we work on weekends into the night, and Americans forego their vacations more than any other country in the world. An unbelievable amount of vacation time that doesn't get taken. We're all stressed. We're all running on stress hormones. Maybe not you, but a greater part of our country is doing that. It can seem hopeless. So let's take a look at some of the biology behind stress and fear. There it is up on screen. Chronic stress means, chronic fear, means the stress response system is on nearly full time. It's dumping toxic stress hormones into your system, and they're very damaging to you when it's chronic. They shrink brain mass, in particular in the higher brain area. They switch your emotional set point to negative. They lower your IQ by as much as 40% temporarily, but it's usually when you're needing that intelligence to solve a problem. And that leads to bad decisions. That thwarts peak performance. It predicts marital problems, family dysfunction, as I just stated. It affects the fetus brain development during pregnancy. And it does serious damage to the cardiovascular system. It impairs our DNA. It dampens our immune system. And eventually, it can kill you. If you add up all the stress-related, life-threatening illnesses out there, you have the number one killer of Americans. You can arguably say the number one killer of Americans is how stressed and anxious they are. So when you've been stressed for a long time, again, it means that your body's repeatedly dumping toxic toxic stress hormones into your system. So what I want you to do now, I got that in the wrong place. We'll go back to that. Here's another thing. Stress hormones damage your chromosomes, and that chromosomes hold your DNA. At the ends of your chromosomes, there is a protective cap, a special cap. It's called telomeres, and they protect your DNA. You know, your chromosomes kind of in a spiral. They keep that spiral from coming undone. It's like that shoelace there. You know, when the cap comes off the shoelace, the whole shoelace begins to unwind and degrade. And when that happens with your chromosomes, you start putting out abnormal cells that prematurely age your body, as much as 10 years, prematurely age your brain, put you up for all kinds of problems, including cancer, because it begins to put out abnormal cells. But the good news is that damage that stress does to your brain, to your body, is reversible. And so the question is how? How is that reversible? Well, lo and behold, it's through a change in mindset, through a change in attitude. Elizabeth Blackburn, who won the Nobel Prize in Medicine for her research on telomeres, she studied mothers caring for disabled children. She's at UCSF, and so she studied these mothers up in Marin. And the number of stressors these women face every day is considerable. And sadly, the study found that a large percentage, overwhelming percentage of these women had shortened telomeres from the effect of toxic stress hormones. They found as much as 10 to 15 years, and Dr. Blackburn said that was a conservative estimate. But not all the mothers exhibited shortened telomeres. The telomeres of mothers who had cultivated a positive attitude were still intact, supporting these healthy chromosomes. And as a result, they were likely to live a much longer and healthier and happier life. One of the mothers was quoted as she said, "I have a great attitude." And she said that she figured out in the beginning that she didn't have a great attitude, she'd lose all of her friends. Well, her attitude transcended her circumstances, and as a result, it kept her telomeres intact. The other thing that they found that reversed the damage that telomeres did were of women with ovarian cancer, again, in a very stressful situation, who were in a support group where spiritual principles and attitude shifts were being practiced. So let's go back here to that slide. Maybe it's going to come up later. So what's the point? Well, it's obvious. Stress is serious. Fear is serious. It's life-threatening serious. It's not, this is a quote from Robert Sapolsky, the leading stress researcher in the world. He's out of Stanford. He said, stress is not something you should someday do something about. Because you need to treat it like it's life-threatening serious. You need to attend to it today. And another thing to understand, I've been saying it a few times, but let's underline it here, is that fear, biologically, stress is fear. Fear in whatever form is a condition that activates the brain's stress response system. It dumps all those toxic stress hormones into your system. No fear, no stress reaction, okay? So that was just a phony slide over there. So let's take a look at this. In the same way we took a look at the higher brain, let's take a look at the lower brain. Again, on a piece of paper, build a list of what comes to mind when you reflect on stress as it applies to your life. It can be anything. When you reflect on stress as you know it, what comes to mind? And then again, write down just one word or short phrases. 10 will do, 3 will do. Whatever comes to mind. And when you got your list, raise your hand. That's a good idea, Ingrid. In fact, when you get your list, type it into the chat, and we'll just read it from there.
Shall we start writing them on the board?
Save from stressing Trish.
Okay. Ingrid says snappy.
If you want.
Short-tempered. And closed up.
Impatient.
Closed up. Shut
And
down.
Diane says anxiety, fear, and inadequacy.
Good one. Inadequacy. Fear turns into shame.
Holland says anxiety, shame, and hurt.
Or someone else. Good insight.
Lorraine says impatient and bossy. And one more, Lisa says fearful, hopeless, lack of motivation. And Susan says, I feel it in my body, frustrated.
Now look at that. Oh, go ahead, please. Absolutely. What you're feeling in your body is stress with the
okay, that's all done.
Chemical reaction, the biochemical reaction of stress hormone. Okay, so look at this list. And I invite you to ask yourself, which of these are an external condition, and how many of these are an internal condition? Well, the truth is, they're all internal. You know, this is let me show you a chart. When I do a workshop with companies and people, I have them go through and determine which of the stressors that they listed were internal, which were external. So you have something like money problems, traffic jams, my boss, my team, a long to-do list. They become what people call external, but overwhelmingly, what people list when they find stress as they know it are internal reactions. And even when you look at the ones that we list as external, they're really, you could say, in fairness, you could say they're both. Traffic jams is not only the external condition of stacked up cars, they're the way you're reacting to it. The same with money problems, the same with your boss, the same with your to-do list, the same with your team. You know, it all represents an attitude. It's all internal. Stress is happening in you far more than it's happening to you. And it's very important that people get this and really understand it, because from this, you step into taking responsibility for your emotional state. That's what this is saying. And I think most of you already do that. So let me give you some of the research on how we generate our experience in the world. This is the research that was done in cognitive therapy at the University of Pennsylvania for 40 years, which established that cognitive activity is where peace or fear, happiness or unhappiness all start. Thoughts. The research found three conditions that are at work in generating our mental state. And the first condition is our thought process. Thoughts are powerful. They create our experience, meaning the greater part of happiness or unhappiness are created in our mind, not out there in the world. Cognition refers, to how thoughts generate the way we see the world. And it includes the way we interpret things. It also is the inner dialogue generating what we say to ourselves about people and events, as well as what we say to ourselves about ourselves. And the way we feel at the moment is because of the thoughts you are thinking. The way you're feeling right now is because of the thoughts you were thinking right now, or were thinking a moment ago. The moment we have a certain thought and believe it, we experience an immediate emotional response. So all of our emotions are the results of thoughts we believe, shaping the attitudinal stance we take, for example, optimistic or pessimistic, which in turn produce the expectation of what we think's to come. And that's called the expectancy effect. Harvard University is doing a lot of research on this. This means that a thought producing a positive or negative emotion that supports a trusting or fearful attitude leads to an expectation that something good or bad will happen. It's not really that basic. And this in turn produces behaviors and reactions that make the expectation likely to occur. In other words, we get what we expect to get. And it all follows this algorithm you see up here on screen. That's the first condition, thoughts, okay? The second condition, let's get this clicked over, boom, is when we're feeling upset, fearful, our thoughts are dominated by negative thinking. And as a result, we feel stressed, we feel fearful, we start to see a threatening world bearing down on us. Our thinking is essentially painting us into a fearful corner. And what's worse is that we come to believe that the things really are as bad as our stressful thoughts imagine them to be, because they're generating, it's kind of ridiculous, but the logic of it that we're running is that for this to produce this emotion in me, it must mean that it's real. And then we get afraid about being afraid. And as we look into our past, we begin to remember all the bad things that have happened before. And of course, that projects forward into the future. We see only the repetition of these unending problems, unending stress. And we become what science calls fear conditioned as a result of this pattern. That's a technical term for this nightmare we live when we're chronically stressed and afraid. And it gets worse. I think it couldn't, but it does, which is the third condition. The third condition that research has established is that our anxious, stressful thoughts, fearful thoughts, causing the emotional turmoil we experience, nearly always contain gross distortion or illusions, in other words. And these distorted thoughts, they appear valid again, to our fearful mind, but they're usually incorrect. And they're always irrational, leading to irrational behavior. And the problem is that the brain's fear center, let me get this slide up. The brain's fear center, it's a 2-year-old. It cannot tell the difference between a real danger, like that snake on the left, and something imagined, a crisis your mind created. It sets off a stress reaction when either is present, flooding your system with these stress hormones. So if you're not managing your thoughts, you're going to go down that dark alley. And you now know, go down that dark alley, a lot of damage can happen. It can happen to your system. Okay? Great quote from Michel Montaigne, a 16th century philosopher. He said, "My life has been full of terrible misfortunes, most of which never happened." Mark Twain turned that around. He said, "My life has been a series of terrible calamities, some of which actually happened." It's the same thing. Most of what we call fear is captured, in that old American children's story. What's it called? Chicken Little. Every day, Chicken Little runs through the barnyard yelling, "The sky is falling, the sky is falling." And all the barnyard animals believe him and they run for cover. But of course, the sky never falls. Well, science recently studied this quote up here on the screen. And they weren't actually gearing into that, but that's what they were studying is, how many of our calamities actually happen. And what they did, they had subjects, they had a whole set of subjects. This is at Cornell. They were asked to write down their worries over an extended period of time, and then to go back at the end of that time and identify which worries did not happen. And here's what they found. 85% of what people worried about never actually happen. And yet during that whole time, they stressed over it. They made it real. They dumped stress hormones into their system. They made themselves unhappy, incapable of being happy. And, whenever I'm giving like a keynote or I'm in a course, somebody, um, uh, some pessimist usually raises their hand and invariably shouts out, well, what about the 15% that did happen? As if it proves the point. So they actually studied that, and they found with the 15% that did happen, 79%, nearly 8 out of 10 people, subjects, handled the matter better than they expected, found a way to resolve the problem. So when you put those two findings together, what you find is 97% of the time, these people had nothing to worry about. And then they did a backup study and they found out, well, did this new information shift them to stop worrying? And the answer is no. They continued to worry. So, it raises the question, are we hopeless? Is it a hopeless situation, fear and stress in our lives? Well, we used to think so, not very long ago. When you look at statistics on stress management programs, it looks like what you see up there on screen. And the answer seems to be yes, it's hopeless. During 3 decades of very intense stress management programs, I know you saw them everywhere. Stress actually went up 30% in America. This is out of Carnegie Mellon University. Then at Notre Dame University, they came across a very interesting finding. They discovered that genetics wire your brain for stress and anxiety. Stress management, and that when you think about that, if you have a genetic predisposition to stress, it's not going to change unless that wiring changes. And stress management focuses on changing your behavior. But the truth is, these stress-related behaviors have become hardwired into your brain. And if there is ever going to be a solution to the problem of stress and fear, it's going to require changing the way the brain is wired. So this is the question. Back around 2003, Diane and Jerry and a man named Larry Stupsky and I sat down, and we began to tackle that. And it was at the advent of all the new neuroscience and mindfulness research that you read about so much. Back then, there wasn't any of it. So the question that we were asking, is there a way we can change these faulty brain circuits? And the answer is, whoops. Get back. There you go. Love that picture. The good news is yes, there is a way to rewire your brain. It not only repairs the damage that stress causes to your cardiovascular system, to your telomeres, to your life in general, to your immune system, shutting it down. It also generates the neurological conditions that stimulate the growth of new connections within the higher brain, not only increasing your brain power, but increasing your potential to achieve. You used to think of human potential as, you have so much potential, hope you realize it. Well, what we're finding out about the brain is that the part of our human potential that the brain generates is expandable, and we're beginning to think it's limitless. You can continue to grow new connections within the higher brain, stimulate that growth. And so the question is, of course, how? How do you do that? Well, I think you all know the answer. The answer is through a change of mind, through a change of attitude. The research behind this is sky high at this point. Everything for a human being is mindset. They're even beginning to think that everything in our lives has a placebo effect, through the expectancy effect. What we expect, we get what we expect to get. And the whole placebo effect is tricking people into expecting that if they take the sugar pill, their pain will go away. A change of mind can literally change your brain structure to quiet those stress reactions, to turn off the fear reactions, and to amplify that higher brain function that produces the calm, the logic, the creativity, the optimism that solves your problems. It's called neuroplasticity. Mindset mental attitude, attitudinal healing is neuroplastic. It changes your brain. And this field called neuroplasticity that's emerged over the last 20 years and got started by the Dalai Lama. He asked a bunch of neuroscientists, can the mind change the brain? And at that time, they said, no, the brain can't be changed at all, and certainly not by the mind. So he sent his Tibetan monks to be to have brain scans done, and they found out that peace, inner peace, has a profoundly positive impact on the health of your brain. What you see there on screen are two scans from the Mayo Clinic. One is a scan of somebody who's stressed and depressed, and see the yellow part, that person has lost a great deal of brain function. And then you go over to somebody who's using some form of mindfulness practice to stay calm and creative and optimistic. Look what happens to their brain function. Incredible. And that's what they saw in these Tibetan monks. And, you know, the reason they studied Tibetan monks is that they were beginning to get the cue that peace is a powerful brain changer. And so where else would you go? I mean, monks, their profession is inner peace, right? So take a look at their brains, and what they found in their brains was brain development that previously they didn't even imagine was possible. Gary and Diane have been preaching this long before all of this came around. So here's one of the great researchers, Richard Davidson, wonderful man, done breakthrough stuff. And so he defines neuroplasticity as a change of brain, a change in experience changes your brain. Get that slide up. We can change the brain by changing the mind. And so the brain changes through a change of experience. You can do wonderful affirmations all day long. You can say to yourself, the essence of my being is love all day long. And if it doesn't generate an experience, your brain won't pay attention. So changing experience changes our brain, which then raises the question, well, what changes our experience? And the answer is really, really clear. The answer is our mental attitude. Our attitude and our experience of life are intertwined. Attitude literally shapes our experience. So let's just take a quick, and I know you all know it, but I'm going to take you through a little test of it. You know, it's just simple. If you feel conflict with another person and you're judging them critically, maybe even condemning them, but something changes, some piece of information comes through, something changes your attitude from these judgments, from judgmental, and now you feel compassionate. Something shifts you from defensive to open. Well, would you begin to experience that person differently? Yeah, you would undergo a serious change of experience when you're in the presence of that person. Of course. If you got a problem and your attitude about resolving it's pessimistic, you know, you say, I can't do it. It's hopeless. You know, I'm going to fail. And something changes your attitude, optimistic. Some form of support comes forward, and you begin to think, you know, I actually think I can deal with this. And your attitude begins to shift in the direction of becoming optimistic. Suddenly the experience of that problem changes from being a problem to being a challenge. Suddenly it goes from punishing you to being a source of fun. Changes your experience. And you know, you change your attitude from worry and doubt to faith and trust. You experience life differently, the world differently. And at the heart of all of these shifts in experience is a change from fear to peace. And you make that change, and your brain wires to support a better life experience. So here it is, neuroplasticity, a change of attitude. It changes experience, changes the brain. Look at that for a moment and take it in. So let's see if there's any questions at this point. You can either type them in or you can speak it. And if you don't have any, that's fine. Just go on. Diane's typing. Oh, thank you. Get a couple of people typing. Will I address belief systems? No. Other than to say you can have a belief system that says you can change and a belief system that says you can't change. That deals with the neuroplasticity, but that would be a whole belief systems would be a whole other workshop. Thank you, Susan. She says very good explanation. Okay. All right. In fact, Diane, if you do a something on belief system, I'll show up in my best suit. I'd love to hear what you and Jay have to say about that. All right. So let's get with what creates the change in our experience, the change in our attitude. Okay. It all starts. Well, let me go back and say something else. Need a little more of a lead-in here. So, if every day you practice shifting your attitude in this general direction from fear to peace, from pessimistic to optimistic, however you want to define the subsets of fear that create stress in our lives, if every day you practice shifting your attitude in this general direction from fear to peace in a matter of 4 to 6 weeks, the evidence is your brain will rewire to quiet those stress reactions, those anxiety problems, and amplify that higher order brain function, put you in the driver's seat of your experience. And it all starts with our becoming more and more mindful of our own pattern of fearful thinking. So let's take a look at that. Okay. This means increasing awareness about, things not advancing. Well, I'll tell you what it increases the awareness about. There should be something coming on screen, but it's what we're talking about, awareness about what you think and how what you think turns into what you feel and how what you think and feel turns into how you see the world, how you see yourself, how you see other people, and how all of this eventually turns into what you expect is going to happen. And restoring your brain to health starts with becoming aware of how your unconscious fears have been routinely activating the stress response system and limiting your power to be effective in the way you want to be effective in the world. And it might sound preposterous to some that simple awareness could rewire something as complex as the brain's stress response system, but it does. Look at this slide here. Oh, now you're going to give it. Well, thank you. There you go. How you think turns into what you feel, how you perceive people, events, the world, and how you relate to it all, and then what you expect will happen. So bringing your pattern of fear, again, we're focusing in on the science. So this is the science that supports the power of awareness. So bringing your pattern of fear into greater awareness can help promote the growth of what are called GABA fibers in your brain. GABA stands for gamma aminobutyric acid, but GABA is much easier to remember. So, really, in reality, modulating your cognitive and emotional state, your attitude, you are literally instructing your higher brain, your prefrontal cortex, to release this thing called GABA. And to signal that, and this GABA, what it does is it signals the brain's fear center, the amygdala, to calm down. GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. It projects down from the prefrontal cortex to the amygdala and the brain's fear center, and it secretes a peptide that extinguishes fear. It's called fear extinction, is the neurological term for it. And how is it developed? How do you strengthen this system? You strengthen it through awareness. And when your fear and your stress is running unconsciously, running on auto, it's your default system running on automatic pilot. This link from the higher brain down to the lower brain that's causing you all this trouble, it weakens through awareness of the pattern, your thought pattern moving into your emotional experience. Through awareness on that, it strengthens. Okay? So the kind of awareness I'm speaking of is a spiritual shift. And it's a spiritual shift in the direction of this reality, not this proposition, this reality, that the essence of your being is love, waking up to that reality. Spirituality is about waking up, and awareness is about waking up. But waking up to what? Well, to the discovery of the first principle of attitudinal healing, that the very essence of what and who you are is love. Love is the most important human experience. I mean, who among us here would want to leave this seminar today and never experience love again? No one. And nearly all the scientific research shows that our first nature, which is what this statement is, the essence of your being is love, your true nature, your first nature, as science calls it. All the scientific research shows that our first nature is compassionate, sharing. It's very cooperative. It's kind. It's very loving. Quite the opposite of what Freud thought. He thought that he described this as a mob that needed a superior authority to keep us in check. You know, my very wise Irish Catholic godmother used to say that God is love. And she told me that if you want to get a glimpse of God, watch babies and little children. You'll get it by doing that. You'll see where we come from. And science actually has come to agree with her. You know, one way science uses in identifying the most fundamental characteristics of human being, of human nature, is to look at babies. You know, you don't get more innocent than a little baby. Babies are as innocent as a human mind can get. Well, experiments carried out at Yale University found that even the youngest humans have a sense of right and wrong. And furthermore, they have a clear instinct to prefer good over evil, which for us, you know, to put it in our terms, to prefer love over fear. They instinctively prefer helping and kind people. People show up like that over people who are hindering and unkind and anxious. And it lasts into adulthood, this preference. Scientists analyzed videos of what people did in the immediate aftermath of the explosions at the Boston Marathon, and they found that countless people ran not away from the blast, they ran towards the injured, the risk of their own life. Remember to think for the higher good. That's built into us. And to turn in the midst of a crisis like that, where a real and present danger happened, and to turn and run to aid other people means that those people overrode their fear center, their amygdala, which would have definitely kept running away from the blast. And studies at Harvard have found that human beings are overwhelmingly cooperative. They're willing to give for the good of the group, even when it comes at their own personal expense. That's loving. That's a part of our nature. And now there's even evidence, growing evidence, that leading scientists to the conclusion that war is not innate to our human nature, that the evidence suggests at this point that war was rare until relatively recently. When we go back to what we call so-called primitive times, it was a pretty rare thing to happen. You know, the point is that we got this great, big, loving heart, and it represents our first nature. And we suffer precisely when we get separated from that loving, caring, trusting heart. And that's what defines our second nature. Suffering is our second nature. That's what the Buddha was telling us. It's fear, generating shame, which, you know, we saw that in what we charted from your shares. It's fear generating shame, which, as we have discussed so far, is largely brain made. It largely gets wired into our brains. And fear and shame become our default brain state instead of defaulting to an experience of peace and love and a sense of connection with all that is. So it's important to understand that this second nature and how it produces fear and shame. And it's important to understand that it's not your fault. The behaviors and the perspectives it generates in you is not your fault. At least that's what science has found. So look at that screen. It's a consequence of genetics and a painful past programming your brain to default to fear. And so what a meta-analysis on happiness, what they discovered is that 50% of why we are suffering is due to the stress gene. And some of us, a majority of us, inherit a stress gene that's upregulated. In other words, it's turned up high. And because of that, you're more likely to be fearful. You're more likely to overreact to life stressors. And compounding the problem is the way our parents and our society and our institutions have conditioned us to believe that success and happiness, all that we're striving for, come from the world. They come from what's happening, external factors like having a good job, like making money, like buying a house, like achieving a great reputation, having lots of things, lots of objects, finding a soulmate. And you put those two factors together, the genetic factor and the social orientation, and you have a condition in which anything that's out of conformity with this external focus on the world in a reactive way, anything that falls out of conformity with this programming, and you suffer. You're going to suffer. We feel afraid, worried, or ashamed if people don't live up to our expectations. So common. Or if we don't get the job or the promotion, or we don't make the sale, we go into a crisis. Or if we're in debt, all this thing about money in this country, if we're in debt, we feel terribly ashamed and frightened. Right down to the most trivial things, like a traffic jam, or a computer that doesn't work, or an email or a phone call that hasn't been returned yet. It all piles up. We're expecting the world to make us feel peace, and the fear of failing in the world kicks our stress response system in the high gear. It drives us to work harder. We could become more stressed, more anxious, which bottoms this depression and shame. And on top of all of that, I've been coaching people for the last 10 years, and I'm always surprised at a fundamental fact, which is most people believe that fear protects them. Well, look at all of the research we showed that stress is fear. That is no form of protection. That's going in the opposite direction. And all this means that we live a stressful existence. We're at the mercy of people and events, showing up in the way we expect them to show up, and crashing into all this worry and shame and fear if they don't. It's a pathetic way to live. It's not our fault. On and it goes until we discover that happiness or success have little or nothing to do with people or circumstances. And that's a hard one for people. Research has found, the research really backs it up, has found that circumstances only account for 10% of what makes you happy, makes you successful. But that 10% is never lasting. It's episodic. We experience what's called conditional happiness. That's a technical term. It disappears the moment conditions change again. And of course, in this world of ours, conditions always change. It's a mercurial world. Why it was made that way, I have no idea, but it is that way. And you can go from getting good news one moment and feeling great, and getting bad news 10 seconds later and feeling awful. And so up and down we go at the mercy of conditions. That's not authentic happiness. That's not authentic peace. It's a precarious kind of peace that doesn't last. And so the point is that changing our situation doesn't make a big difference in terms of happiness or success in life. And research has found that, in terms of circumstances, that the blind, people who are paralyzed, people who are malformed, are no less happy than other people They found that lottery winners are not ultimately happier because of their good fortune, and that paraplegics are not doomed to unhappiness once they've adjusted to their misfortune. Paraplegics come to a point where they become very suicidal, and they realize if they don't change their attitude, they're going to die. And they do. They more often than not change their attitude, and then look what happens. When you get the special Olympics where these people are doing incredible things. So the good news is there is a change we can make. It changes everything. It changes that, and you see it up there in blue. And it's our mental attitude. Attitude counts for 40% of what makes us happy and fulfilled. And that 40% is just the beginning. The effect of attitude becomes bigger and bigger as we practice shifting from fear to peace, because what they're finding is that it has the power to down-regulate the stress gene, placing you in charge of your experience. So now you've down-regulated the stress gene through a shift in attitude. Attitude's already, a positive attitude is going to take you 40% in the direction of recovering your first nature. Now you're at 90% in charge of your experience. And I guarantee you, your circumstances are going to improve. There you are. The effect of attitude becomes much bigger as we practice. Practice could not be more important. And what happens is your brain changes, and what it changes is to get you to choice. Get you to choice. You're always going to have to make a choice. There's no getting around that. But when you're fearful and stressed, it's the brain using you. When you make the shift, it's you using your brain, and now you're at choice. And you discover, as Jerry and Diane tell us very often, that people or events that cause us to be upset. We can be peaceful inside, regardless of what's happening outside. Our whole life is not about what's happening outside, but it's what's happening inside. So that slide summarizes much of the research that I've just presented, and this is a basic part of what facilitates a return to our first nature. It's waking up, and waking up's a matter of awareness. So let's step into awareness. Okay, and I go like that. Oh, thank you. He woke up. Wouldn't it be great to wake up like that every day? Well, we can. Where do we start? We start with awareness. We start with mindfulness is the word that's very popular right now. It's just another word for simple awareness. Waking up. Awareness narrows the gap between how, we are meant to be and how our genetics and conditioning have made us. We start by waking up to how we actually are, moment by moment, which may not be fun if we are, like most people, is a knee-jerk reactions into fear. And the first thing to understand is that most people, at least initially, they don't want to wake up. It's painful to confront how crazy we are, how crazy our thoughts have made us, how hopeless our attitude has become, how much we have wrong about life, about what is real, how unhappy and shameful we actually are, how much we're running that. People often don't realize how depressed they've been for years until they experience a genuine, spontaneous moment of joy. The contrast is enlightening. Our brain and our ingrained conditioning, it made us so crazy that we think this crazy thought system is what keeps us safe, as I said. And people privately think that if they listen to, something like Jerry and Diane talking about attitudinal healing, believe me, they come away saying to themselves that they're going to end up broke, alone, and homeless. That they're setting themselves up for an airy-fairy life that has no connection to reality. And my stepfather growing up used to say to me all day, wait till you get into the real world. And he was a very fearful, brutal man, and his real world is what I've been trying to escape from my whole life, to get into the real world that attitudinal healing defines. It's all unconscious, mind you, but for most of us, we have to reach bottom. Most people have to reach bottom with the suffering and become really sick of it. That's That's when we begin to say, in the words of A Course in Miracles, that there must be a better way. And that's when we commit ourselves to do the work and then recommit ourselves every single morning. So how do we wake up? Well, as I stated, we wake up through awareness, which is, simple self-observation, paying attention. Awareness is a kind of as-if state. It's as if you are outside yourself looking at yourself. It even works to look at yourself as if you were somebody else, as if you were outside yourself looking at another person. Give you some objectivity and to get you out of the turmoil while you're in it. In some sense, it's like not being afraid of being afraid, not being depressed about being depressed, not shaming yourself for feeling ashamed. That's kind of a big first step, and you can achieve it through awareness, through this self-observation I just described. And one tool that relates to the research that I've cited is 4 steps to awareness, and there you see it up on screen. So let's go through each one. At the beginning, what we're becoming aware of is our negativity. We repress it. Shame doesn't go away mostly because people repress it. You can't change what you repress. It can't teach you anything. It can't lead to a shift. And so we become aware of our negative thoughts and emotions. We embrace them instead of resisting them. The old statement, what we resist persists. It's very true. And we work with not being afraid again of feeling afraid. We just feel it. We allow ourselves to be in the experience of it, observing it. And we're aware of the thoughts that we're believing, like I'm going to fail, producing the negativity and the emotion. And then the next step is to be absolutely clear that, as we found out, stress is internal. It's happening in you. And to be clear that these thoughts and emotions are in you. They're not in reality. This reaction, this strong, unhappy, miserable reaction is going on in you. It's not out there in the world. You get rid of it, you'll more than likely find the world is just fine. It's doing its thing in its usual way. What needs to change is you. 3, that step is to be clear. And this is tricky for some people, but it's moving in the right direction. To be clear that although these reactions are in you, they're not you. They're like these clouds crossing the blue sky, the open sky. The Tibetans call this first nature. The essence of our being is love. They call it blue sky. These emotions that you're experiencing, whether it's fear, depression, shame, or whatever, they pass. But this part of you that's this blue sky, this part of you that's your essence, it's love, it's unaffected. It's uncontaminated by all of this that's going on. It's pure. We often say, I'm depressed. Well, that creates an experience within your brain called identity. In other words, you say I'm depressed is identifying yourself as depressed, not as this blue sky, and that's false. You're having an experience called depression, and it's good to name it that way. And it will pass, as I said, like the clouds. So see yourself as that blue sky that clouds may have darkened, but will pass. Okay? And don't say I'm afraid. Say this experience I'm having is fear. Don't identify with it. Identify with the blue sky. And last, understand. Again, the world does not need to change. You do. And it's like what Mother Teresa said. I love this quote of her. She said, I used to believe that prayer changes things. But now I know that prayer changes me. And I changed. And it's very much the same as what Gandhi said. Be the change you want to see in this situation. If you're finding somebody who's being condemning with you, return condemnation with love. Be the change you want to see. Not for this other person, but to orient you back to the direction of your essential nature, which is loving. But what happens when we do this? Well, this is what happens. This becomes real. What we begin to experience is an expansive sense of self that's connected with all that is, that's uncontaminated. by whatever our brain does, by our emotional state, by our past, by all this frenetic striving to succeed, by our mistakes or errors. It's the discovery that happiness already exists in you, separate from any conditions. There are no conditions. Your basic nature is happy. And that's called unconditional happiness. It's a natural state. And until you move into an experience of the essence of your being is love, you won't believe it. But once you make that shift over, it'll change. Your whole mindset will change in a very positive way. Um, you know, people get so externally focused that they forget about unconditional happiness, which means that there are no problems we need to solve first. There's no goals we need to achieve. There's no one we need to please. There's nothing we need to prove or change or fix. And yet we're running around doing all of those things. Your happiness is your natural state. And what a relief that that's true. And it's backed up by science. I tell you, it was essential good news. I think it's the good news that Christ brought to the world. So I want to tell you a story. I mean, the challenge is you got to drop your fearful illusion. There's no outside condition you need to satisfy except this internal condition. You got to drop your fearful illusions and your meaningless attachments. And peace and happiness emerge as your experience all by itself. And here's the irony of ironies. Get this. Research shows that happiness actually is what predicts success in our careers, in our family life. It's not the other way around. You know, the cartoon in Jerry's book of the cart before the horse. Well, we found that out. My mother used to say, when my ship comes in, then I'm going to be happy. Well, we all say that. You know, if I get this sale, I'll be happy. If I get out of debt, I'll be happy. If I go to get graduate school, I'll have the means to be happy. Well, it turns out that what makes a person most successful in their careers is happiness. The greater the happiness, the more success is predicted for us. So, you know, we get to have our cake and eat it too. I love that. Thank you, God. You know, all of the things we're talking about are incredibly simple to do. I've complained a lot to God over the years about how hard he made my life and why did he get me born. And when you take a look at attitudinal healing as a prescription for the return to your first nature, you see it's incredibly simple. Doesn't mean it's easy, but it is simple. And the more you apply it, the easier it gets. I coached a lawyer on this 4-step process. Let's go back. This 4-step process here. Big, powerful lawyer, Silicon Valley law firm, the biggest Silicon Valley law firm, you know, dealing with intellectual property and patents. And she was really diligent about applying it and working with attitudinal healing because she was sick of being stressed. And she was really disgusted with herself for taking it home and projecting it onto her husband and her kids. You know, she said when she started out in her adult life, she had this vision of being this great mother and this great lawyer. And she said, I became a great lawyer at the expense of being a great mother. She said, I have to put a stop to it. So meaning she was open to finding another way. There must be another way. And she was willing to experiment. So she did this 4-step very diligently. You know, I kept giving her gold stars. And one day, at the end of a very long day, a client meeting that she had went longer than she planned, and she missed her train, which meant that she was going to late to pick up her kids at daycare. And, you know, she's, as I said, she has this goal to be a very good mother. And so this really stressed her. It shamed her. It made her feel like she was failing her kids, which, of course, is a shame response. But then she remembered this 4-step awareness. You know, be aware of the negativity, be aware of the shame, be aware of the anxiety, the stress you're feeling. Remember, it's in you, not in reality. That this reaction is not you. And you have the power to change your inner experience without the world doing anything. And so she did. She started working the process. And the first thing that happened, the first thing she noticed is there was, move this, that's the way the birds say, she heard this bird singing away, in a tree that was behind her. And it lit her up. It felt like grace to her. And it lit her up with how beautiful life was when you let go in this way. And it was funny. She said that she had never heard a bird singing at the train station. In fact, she'd been living so stressfully, she hadn't even noticed there were trees at the train station, let alone birds singing. It was a great wake up for her. And that's how this wake up happens sometimes. Um, awareness is, as Anthony DeMello says, correct your mind and the rest of life will fall into place. And what will most especially fall into place is that essentially loving nature of ours. It's the most powerful force in this planet, in this universe we're living in. It's also important that we start over every day. This brain we have defaults to the fear center. That's because it's a survival system. So, when we lived back in the cage, when we woke up in the morning, the very first thing our brain had us do was look outside the cave to see that there wasn't a saber-toothed tiger looking in, right? Well, that's stuck with us. And so every day we are challenged to make the shift out of fear, out of that fear center into this higher brain, leading to this higher experience of life. And starting a day positive, it's an antidote to the frenetic early morning rush out the door that most of the people, the executives I coach, go through. It encourages us to set aside just a few minutes, doesn't take much, first thing in the morning to consciously frame a positive mindset to meet the day's challenges. But, quiet and thoughtful is not how most people typically start their day, even though it can make such a huge difference in the way the rest of the day is going to go. When I ask these people I coach, how do you start your day? They say they jump out of bed, they gulp down a big cup of coffee or two, they help feed dress the kids, they get dressed themselves, and then they drive straight into a traffic jam that stresses them. Well, that routine is going to frame the day in fear and anxiety and stress. So let's find a way of doing that. It's very, very simple. The way I do it is that I wake up every morning, I meditate for 20 minutes, and then I frame my day. I tell myself that I'm going to have a great day. I visualize achieving all the things I need to achieve. And I include in that achieving the state of mind that I want to sustain throughout the day, the peace and the love and the sense of connection that goes along with it. And that my primary goal every day is to be at peace, to choose to be at peace. What they found, the research behind this is, oops, a little too soon there. The research behind this shows that starting the day in this way, consciously framing it in a positive way, people who do that, they experience more positive emotions during the day, which means they're wiring their brain in a positive way. They experience more excitement, more joy, more pride, more connection. That sense of connection is what they find with these people who start their day in a positive way. They're more engaged in their work. They feel more connected with other people. They're more supportive to other people. All of this stuff means that you framed your day to move in the direction of your first nature. The essence of your being is love. And as a result, they achieve more during that day than other people. And on top of it all, they found that these people are likely to sleep better at night. I mean, that's it. 5 minutes is all it really takes to do that. And that's a huge return on an investment of time of 5 minutes. All of the things I just listed, all those positive. Okay, another principle of attitudinal healing is that all minds are joined. All minds are joined. And I remember when I first read that, I thought that was kind of bad news because other people could hear all the judgmental, negative things I was thinking about them at the time. Not my fault, really. My brain, my stepfather really went went overboard to wire my brain to be like that. He's suspect of everybody. But attitudinal healing asserts that all minds are joined, and now there is scientific evidence for this. Let's take a look at that. Kind of mind blowing. You know, our innate need for acceptance and belonging is wired into our brain. When people who are madly in love and they think of their sweethearts, what scientists find is it activates the same center of the brain that a shot of cocaine activates. Just very elevating. They get high. Love makes us high in a good way. You know, Ram Dass used to say the point is not to get high, it's to be high. Well, your brain can take you there. And the physiological response to rejection is just as powerful. You know, what happens to people when they've been rejected? The muscles of the digestive system contract. They make you feel as if there's a pit in your stomach. Your airways constrict, making it harder to breathe. Your heartbeat, it slows so noticeably that it feels literally like your heart is breathing. And the brain perceives rejection in the same way as if you were physically injured. So, you know, we experience rejection as physical pain. There was a story in the news about a boy who was severely abused emotionally and physically. It was really terribly tragic beginning to his life. He'd been locked in a closet, he'd been beaten. You know, you can imagine how stressful every moment of his childhood had been until social workers were alerted to it, and he became a ward of the court. And it was discovered that he had zero growth hormones in his blood system. You know, one of the things that stress reactions do is they shut down long-term systems. So they shut down your immune system. You know, it takes 10 days for your immune system to heal a cold. So what the brain is doing when it's afraid is trying to move all the energy into fight, flight, or freeze, which is the large muscles. So it maps out all of those long-term systems and pull the energy where the brain believes it's immediately needed. So, you know, your immune system shuts down, your productive system shuts down. It's why stress and infertility are connected. And your growth system shuts down. It takes 18 years or so to grow a human being. Well, this poor boy, chronic stress had completely shut down his growth system, threatening his life. And he was hospitalized, and over the next 2 months, he developed a very close relationship with the nurse at the hospital. You know, undoubtedly the first normal relationship he'd ever experienced. And to everyone's amazement, his growth hormones zoomed back to normal. And none of the doctors could explain it, not at first. Not until his friend, the nurse, went on vacation and the boy's blood levels dropped back to zero. And when the nurse returned from vacation, they shot back up again. You know, the rate at which this child was depositing calcium in his bones could be explained entirely by how safe and loved he was feeling. That's why attitudinal healing says love is the most powerful healing force in the world. So this story is evidence of that. So the first obstacle to connecting with others, of course, is our tendency to judge. You know, we learn to be right, make everybody else wrong. I remember one time I was in a conversation with Jerry, and he said, "Would you rather be right or happy?" And I said to him, sort of tongue in cheek, I said, "Being right is what makes me happy." It's nonsense. You know, we judge people. The evidence, and you know, on the social research is we judge people who are wounded like we're wounded, because they produce a shame response in us. We are insecure in ways. We judge people who are insecure in ways that we're insecure, flawed in ways we're flawed. In short, we project on others the moral condemnation we feel towards ourselves. We also judge people who we perceive are different from us. This is a troubling feature of the brain, and particularly when we think about racism, is that our brain does not like a difference. It goes on alert. And in overcoming racism, social scientists are beginning to find that they have to help people understand and gain control over that knee-jerk response from our survival system, that's throwing us into survival mode just because of the color of somebody's skin, or any other differences. Our brain does not like them. So we also judge people who are below us in rank or status, who are worse off than us. Again, differences. So unconscious, we don't even recognize it. You know, and a simple way to understand all of this, is, say for example, like what happened to me the other day, you return from a long business trip or vacation where you've been eating at restaurants and eating a lot. And when you return home, you step on the scale and you see you're 10 pounds heavier than when you left. And you can't even zip up a pair of pants. They don't fit anymore. And later that day, you interact with a person who's very much overweight. I was interacting with my friend Terrell. He's very overweight, and I was feeling disgusted toward him. Well, judging means that for the moment, um, I didn't believe that the essence of his being was love. It was fat. The essence of his being was fat, and it was all a projection of what I felt judgmental towards myself. Okay? Well, often we think that I didn't say anything to my friend, of course, I kept it to myself, but nonetheless, that thought came in and that projection happened. And, we think the judgments we make in our heads, they're inconsequential because no one hears it, through their ears. But it's not so. They hear it through their brains. Our facial expressions, our body language, our tone of voice may not even be we may not even be aware of it, of the emotional subtleties that are beginning to shift inside of us. Well, all of it registers inside the other person's brain. It gives us away. And our ability to read each other's brains is a fact of science. It's called the mirror neuron system. This cluster of neurocell, it was discovered by a team of Italian neuroscientists in 1996 in a study with monkeys. These two monkeys were in separate cages, separate pens, both of them with their brains wired to scanning devices. And the scientists observed that anytime one of the monkeys ate a peanut, a specific part of his brain became active. But they also observed that the exact same brain network lit up in the second monkey who wasn't given a peanut, wasn't eating a peanut, but was simply watching the other monkey eat. His brain mirrored that of the other monkey. And this initial finding propelled a huge amount of research. It's ongoing for what's become termed the mirror neuron system. And in human beings, the mirror neuron system is much more complex than monkeys. And it really enables us to read each other. It's as simple as the way a gesture or a grin instantly communicates some kind of meaning. Mirror neurons track the emotional flow in a conversation, the body language, somewhat the tone of voice, even the intention of another person. I'm sure you've had the experience as you've listened to somebody and watched their face. You went, I think I know where this is going, and I don't want to go there. Mirror neurons are what make your emotional state contagious, for good or bad. It's why biologically friends are healing and enemies are toxic. It's why my hostility is going to bump up your blood pressure, and your comfort and kindness is going to lower mine. And when we see someone suffering, when we see someone suffering, our mirror neurons feel that suffering. And the chief quality that the mirror neuron system is generating is called empathy. Empathy is a huge network of neurons producing connection between you and other people. So we're going to experiment with the mirror neuron system. I got a bad cold and my tongue is not cooperating. It's tripping over, so excuse me for that. But we're going to do an experiment on mirror neurons. The one that was done at UCLA, much of the groundbreaking work in mirror neurons is being done at UCLA Medical School. And this is one experiment, one way in which they began to measure mirror neuronic activity. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you on a mirror neuron odyssey into a series of photographs of people's faces. And each photograph will remain on screen for 8 to 10 seconds before transitioning to the next one. And your task is really simple. Just look at the photo, sense the emotion that is being expressed on that face, and really allow yourself to feel the emotional state of the person in that photo. See if you can enter that person's experience totally, as if it were your own experience. Don't analyze it. Just feel it. Feel that face with your heart. And if you find it's confused, you're not sure, don't worry about it. Wait for the next photo to come around. Okay? So here we go. All right. Most people are surprised at how much emotion they can relate to. Our repertoire of emotion is vast and is able to, our brain is able to distinguish between very subtle experiences being expressed by other people. So this is empathy. The mirror neuron system is about empathy. And empathy is what the screen says. Empathy is the willingness to enter another person's private world so completely that you lose all desire to judge them. That's the definition given by Carl Rogers. So take a moment and reflect on who in your life might need your empathy at the moment. Might need you to open up your heart in this way and to feel their private world so completely that you drop judgment. Doesn't mean you need to rush and be with this person. Remember, our brains read each other. Just the quality of your presence the next time you're with them that matters. And here's where awareness comes into practice, comes into play. Empathy stems from knowing your own joys, your own fear, your own pain, knowing them well enough to relate to another's joy and pain and fear. But most of us shut them down. And, even when we're fearful. I remember when I was at the Center for Attitudinal Healing, one of the things we used to laugh about is we turned letting go of fear into judgment. Why? I'm not letting go of fear. I shouldn't have any fear. Well, I have fear. Bring it into awareness. Don't be afraid of being afraid. See where it takes you, which is nowhere. Now you can let it go. You repress it, the whole system shuts down. The more we practice awareness, the more in touch we become with our own emotions, and the more empathic we become. The more empathic we become, the closer we get to that first nature, the essence of our being as love. Stay over here. I am leaving out forgiveness. I think forgiveness deserves a whole session all by itself. There's so much, and there's only so much you can cover in 2 hours. However, I want to say that forgiveness is another major obstacle to remaining connected to other people. Love is the way our biology functions best. It's a fact of life. And there's another fact of life. We fail at love more than we may care to admit. We fail at empathy and acceptance, especially when we're afraid. And we fail, and others fail us, obviously. And when a human being is fearful or stressed, the state of their brain make them capable of serious mistakes. So forgiveness is the means to erasing that injury. But I do want to give you a simple awareness exercise that helps you underline the importance of forgiveness and actually to connect it to happiness, which of course is your first nature. So what I'm inviting you to do is this week, and you can start today, simply be aware of grievances that arise in you against anyone or anything, small or large, whenever they surface. And I would suggest you focus in on the trite grievances, the trite annoyances, like an aggressive driver during rush hour. It might even be like a person at a checkout stand taking too long. It happened to me a couple of days ago. An elderly woman was just taking so long to count out her coins, and I was brewing. I found myself brewing a grievance in my mind. It can be someone that you're having dinner with who takes a cell phone call. How annoying is that? Anything. It can be literally anything. Practice being aware of the everyday grievances and judgments you might be making. Practice letting the grievances go completely. Make this process a daily routine. And what you will begin to become aware of is, first of all, the number of grievances your brain is running all day long. And then as you let them go completely, what will dawn on you is that when you forgive, you become happier. And when you are happy, you can forgive a great deal. And when you can forgive a great deal, you're back in your first nature. So you'll see that forgiving is a gift we give ourselves. So often I tend to think, well, I'll forgive this person. I'll do it for that. Heck with that. I'll do it for myself, for my own peace of mind, for that lovely experience of blue sky. So let's move to the last section, which is the research on how inner peace and creativity go hand in hand. They're entwined. Where science is beginning to see how creative insight is generated for the first time, largely because of the technology, the fMRIs that they have. And they're actually beginning to see how it's generated. What's becoming clear is that a lot of the old standard definitions of creativity and how we produce it are inaccurate or wrong. So let's take at a few of the myths that the research shows on creativity. And creativity, the reason creativity is here is being creative is a part of our first nature. You know, the old religion that I grew up in said God created you in his image. He created you creative, gave you a powerfully creative capacity. And it's, you notice, it makes us happy. I had my grandchildren here, and I threw a bunch of paper on the table and a bunch of crayons, and they went at it, you know, they went at it like crazy. Creativity is part of our nature. So let's look. Myth number one is the old belief that people were either genetically gifted with creativity or not, you know, Picasso, Einstein. But it's not true. Creativity involves a neural network. It's called the anterior superior temporal gyrus. It's on the right side of the brain, which is significant because the right hemisphere of the brain is very active during creativity, and it gets shut down by the left side, the analytical side of the brain. And so now scientists begin to talk in terms of, are you analytic centered or insight centered? And both are powerful, both are important. But there are times that analytic centered doesn't solve your problem. You need an insight. And there's a way in which you can achieve that insight. And this is, and believing that you're not genetically gifted with creativity is the first thing that's got to go. What happens is that and superior temporal gyrus, what it does is it brings an insight to you by passing from the right brain into the left brain, an out of the box way of seeing the problem. Exceptionally creative people, what they have over those who aren't is not the brain equipment. We all have that, but they've intuitively figured out how to activate this part of the brain. And by the end of this little session, you're going to know how to do it too. You know, tapping your creative potential is relatively stress-free. You know, simply placing people in a room painted blue, like a blue sky, can double their creative output, double it. Blue intimates the sky, the ocean, invoking a more peaceful response in people. And invoke almost anything peaceful, and you've opened the door to creative insight. So cross that one out of your mind if you think that other people are gifted creatively and you're not, or you're not capable of being that well endowed. You are. Myth number two. It's the assumption that creativity takes an intense, sustained focus, but it's not the best approach when you need a creative solution, when you need insight. The so-called smart drugs that are hitting the market, they can keep the brain focused on a problem for hours. They're amazing that way. But what science has found, what research has found, at the end of the day, it does not deliver any real creative insights. It got a lot of work done, not much in the way of creativity, if that's what that project needed. And in every single corporation struggling to be competitive, innovation is the name of the game in this century. Even more telling is a study that found that students diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, you know, the old ADHD, they got significantly higher scores on tests that measure creativity. The difficulty they have in focusing is a creative blessing. It makes them more imaginative. And researchers found that the more you think about a creative problem, the more you mess it up. So people with ADHD also win more prizes at art fairs and science fairs. Isn't that amazing? I would have liked to have told that to my sixth grade teacher. Research on creativity has found that analyzing and thinking about a creative challenge really blocks a creative process. The study found that the more you think about a creative problem, again, the more you mess it up. It found that you actually need to reduce cognitive activity in order to engage the right hemisphere of the brain and that neural network, creative neural network, to get a creative outcome. Einstein periodically engaged in what he called thought experiments. He would sit quietly in his chair, and then he'd allow his mind to wander, sometimes for hours at a time. And he reported that it was in this kind of unfocused state that most of his creative insights were born. So you can get rid of that one. You don't have to be highly focused when you need a creative. Go in the opposite direction. The next myth, go towards peace, in other words. The next myth is the assumption that creativity means you have to put your nose to the grindstone. Look at that one. Actually, the creative insight that leads to innovation, real innovation, meaningful innovation, a great book, a great company, a great product, requires stepping away from the grind for a while by relaxing, by taking a break, by letting everything go, which frees your mind and your brain to begin to connect the dots. Your brain, what they find in a narrow focus is your brain is narrowly focused, and when it lets go, suddenly it's like all of these geniuses come into the room, sit at the table, and start brainstorming with you. And then when you begin to get highly focused, the room clears out and it's just you there. So for decades, 3M Corporation, all the glues and the Post-its and the sponges that we've been using for years, they come out of that company. And they've had this policy. It's called the 15% timeout. And what people are encouraged to do is to devote 15% of their time, so that's 6 hours in a 40-hour week, to doing nothing, to letting their mind wander, to going for a walk, to lying on a couch. They actually have rooms with couches in them. They actually created a park where people could go for walks. Just let things drift. Google does the same thing. And Dr. Art Fry of 3M, very famous, he created Post-its. He created it on his 15% timeout, thinking of ways to bookmark hymns for his church choir, because it was driving him crazy. He would turn to this page and everybody would fumble around. So he invented Post-its on his 15% time. So again, you don't have to put your nose to the grindstone, quite the opposite. Inner peace, creativity. Myth number 4 says you must suffer to create. It's a starving artist, it's, all of that, the clown dying in the gutter. It's nonsense. It's the opposite of the truth. There's this wonderful quote from one of America's great artists, David Lynch. He's a filmmaker, a visual artist, a music composer. And he was asked about creativity and suffering. He said, if you're suffering, even a little bit of suffering cuts into your creativity. In fact, the happier you are, and the wider awake you are, and the more rested you are, and the more at peace you are, the better it goes. Then the ideas can flow way better, way smoother, and faster, and you're going to get more of them. Think back to the list we made of you at the top of your game. That's what David Lynch is talking about. Universal, first nature. Science backs them up. What it found that the people who solve creative problems better when they're in a positive mood. There's a direct connection between a positive emotional state and the amount of creativity you generate, and the amount of creative insight that you receive. Just watching a YouTube video of laughing babies or a comet, your favorite comet, it can increase your creativity by 25%. This puts you in a better mood. A positive mood broadens your scope to look at problems in new ways. A negative mood narrows your focus. Okay? So what does all this information tell us about how do you keep the creative channel open? Well, let's do it peace. What it says is that stimulating the brain's creative networks requires relaxation, a light focus, and a good mood. And the scientists also say, keep the window in your brain open just enough to be aware of a creative insight when it might pop into your brain. At 3M, they suggest putting a little pad and pencil or pen in your pocket and capture it, and then go back to a light focus after you've captured it. We'll go back to being relaxed and in a good mood. You need just enough awareness to do that. So the question then becomes, what brings all 3 of these conditions together at one time? Well, it's not a beer or a martini. The answer is taking a walk. By the way, there's your superior temporal challenge, just to prove to you that it exists. So Stanford researchers found that creative output increased by an average of 60%. That's a huge increase when people took a walk, and that the creativity a walk stimulated actually continued after a person returned to their desk, return to whatever work they were doing. Walking has this power to open the brain up to a free flow of ideas. And some of our best creative people use walks to boost their creativity. I got into doing walks. Actually, Gary and Diane got me into doing it. They used to, I'm sure they still do, but when I visited them in Hawaii, they came back and they looked all wonderful. I said, "Where have you been?" We did a God walk, and they would do it every morning. And they would just let God lead the way as they went on the walk. Well, you do that, you're going to be really creative. Look how creative they've been. Look at all the books and things. They're enormously creative. So let's look at some of the other people who use walks. Oh, should have had that up there. 60%, folks, continues after you return to work. So here's people that have famous. Beethoven created complete symphonies in his head while on walks. He was always singing Walking Through the Gardens. Charles Dickens, he would go on a 30-mile walk to work out the plots and the characters in a book he was about to begin. Stephen Jobs was famous for conducting brainstorming sessions on what he called walking meetings. One of the most famous accounts of a walk comes from James Watt. If you don't know, he's the inventor of the steam engine that launched that industrial revolution that we're suffering with right now in terms of all the pollution it's created. But initially, every attempt Watt made to perfect the steam engine failed. And one day, in frustration, he just let it go, gave it up, and went for a walk. And as he relaxed, he experienced this really powerful insight. He said, this is a quote from me, "I had not walked farther than the golf house when the whole thing was arranged in my mind." There's another reason to take these kinds of breaks. Breaks are really powerful. I tell corporate people, breaks are not a union conspiracy against productivity. They are actually what fuel productivity. Breaks help sustain high performance. Breaks are not part of what science, breaks are part of what science calls the basic rest and activity cycle. You see at the top there, the heading BRAC. And what's that? So during the first 90-minute phase of BRAC, brain waves run at a really fast rate. That's why, like the first thing in the morning you come to your desk, you feel wide awake, you feel engaged. It's because your brain waves are humming along. But about 90 minutes later, your brain waves start to slow down. You may get up from your desk and go across the room to fetch something, and you get over there and they're like, what am I here for? You start to feel spacey tired. And most people respond to those signals, the spaciness and the tiredness, by trying to pump up their energy with caffeine or sugar or carbs. Neurologically, what they need is a break, because the fast brain waves burn through the sodium and potassium ions that generate these electrical signals to perform at a peak level. So what that requires is a 20-minute rest to refuel with new ions. And after 20 minutes, you're good to go for another hour and a half, sometimes as long as 2 hours. And this is how you sustain peak performance instead of burning out. Research on people who mastered the violin found that those people who mastered it achieved it through this 90 minutes of practice followed by a 20 or 30-minute break. The musicians who didn't take breaks generally failed to cross the threshold from good to great. But one of the world's present day great artists, if you ever get to see an exhibit of his, you should. His name's Liu Fan. Here's what he says. Here's his description. You will notice it sounds just like Attitudinal Healing. Agitated, busy people, he says, stop and stand still for a moment. Look at the sky. Close your eyes and take a deep breath. If you do this, you will change and the world will come to life. And so will your creative mind. Okay, so summarizing everything here is attitudinal healing principles. All the research I presented can be understood in the second principle of attitudinal healing. Health is inner peace, healing is letting go of fear, which also becomes success is inner peace. Succeeding is letting go of fear. Success in life is not about money or status or acquiring things. It's about restoring ourselves to our first nature. And cultivating our first nature doesn't mean we'll never be upset. We bring all of that into awareness. We all understand, that peace and love is a state of mind we work towards every day, and we correct too whenever we get disengaged from it, separated from it. But the test of your progress isn't perfection. And it's not even enlightenment, really. It's found in the wholeness of our everyday experience of life, of our everyday reality becoming better. There's this wonderful quote from Ernest Holmes that states, I'm going to read it to you. What we demonstrate today.
Don, thank you so much. What a wonderful presentation. I'm so grateful that you were able to share your research and your insights with us in really powerful ways to affirm and to validate our work in attitudinal healing and the value of inner peace. Thank you, thank you.
All going in the right direction. Thank you for your time and for your patience in listening with me. And as we say in attitudinal healing, I wish you peace. Yes, thank you. And all of this research
so true.
You can use.
So those of you who want to hear more from Don and learn more about his work, you can visit his website called ProAttitude.com. There are lots of wonderful materials there, podcasts, interviews on various TV shows like Today Show and Dr. Oz and NPR. He's had lots of wonderful interviews. And his work is posted. He's also got a blog you can tune into. So please do research his research more and continue to enjoy and benefit from Don's work. So thank you, everyone. We hope that you will join us again next month. We have webinars online every month on the third Tuesday of the month, and we hope that you will visit the Attitudinal Healing International website to see what's coming up next. So, Don, it looks like Dr. Talat has raised his hand. He's from Pakistan. I wonder if he would like to say something to you. Dr. Talat, would you like to say something? Okay. Guess not. Anything else you want to say, Don, before we sign off? Yes, I think many of us are joining you in that category. So I hope we'll see you again. Please do join us, everyone. And Don, please come back and talk to us some more. We'd love to have you. Bye-bye.